welcome back to Faith Under Fire, where we define and defend your faith. And today we've got a fascinating show. We're going to be talking to Mark Houck. If you recognize that name, you already know where we're going. If you don't, you're just not going to believe it. So, on the one hand, Mark recently ran for Congress in Pennsylvania, but that's just the tip of the story. And the why he decided to run for office is most fascinating. And let's just say it happened after 20 or so armed agents burst into his house and pointed automatic weapons at his wife and his kids because of his protests at an abortion clinic. We're going to get into it today. But first of all, Mark, God bless you and thank you for showing up. It's great to meet you.
Thanks, Jeff. Good to be with you. Thanks.
All righty. Hey, Mark, first of all, what a story. Let's go and let's just say, first of all, let's go back. How did you get into pro-life activism and just kind of lead us into your life through that story?
Sure. Well, look, I grew up in, rural Pennsylvania, southeastern part of the state. Middle class family, not really in touch with the culture of death, really kind of immune to it. My mother shared with me a picture of an aborted child. She
Mm,
saw that as an important thing to do when
yeah.
I was in my 20s. Not really convicted on the issue. I wouldn't say I was pro-abortion or pro-choice, but I wouldn't be standing up for either issue, really. I probably was more interested in sports and being very selfish in that regard. Christian
Yeah.
my whole life, Catholic Christian. But when I saw
But
that
not
little,
devout at that time. Is that fair? You're just kind of generic Catholic at the time?
I wasn't a nominal Catholic. I was.
Okay.
I mean, I attended Mass every
Okay.
Sunday. I prayed daily, and of course, I'm not as good as I was now, as I am now, as a Catholic. But
Sure.
I wasn't a fallen away or a guy who
Right.
just showed up for
Okay.
Christmas or an Easter. But
Yep.
yeah, when I saw the image in my 20s, it became a real conviction where
Mm,
I couldn't turn away from the issue, and so I
mm,
started to learn more at about 28 years of age, and I started to volunteer and become a part of the local pro-life movement in southeastern PA, which is pretty strong.
yeah.
And then I started to get involved in ministries and volunteer my time, and then I became a lecturer on the issue and talked about abstinence education until marriage, chastity,
Hmm.
and I became an activist as a single guy,
Yeah.
going
Wow.
out to abortion mills all around the Philadelphia area and trying to save lives that are in jeopardy. So it's been a
Yeah.
part of my life for 20 years. I'm
Wow.
50 now, so about 22 years now.
Incredible. Okay, and so then that comes to a head at a certain point. How do we transition from that's your background to what happened? What led up to the incident where a bunch of federal agents, state troopers, etc., all armed with M16s, burst into your house, point guns at your seven kids and your wife? What? Come on, help explain this to us.
Yeah. Well, Dobbs versus Jackson happened. That's truly the origin because I've been doing the same thing for 22 years, right? And with no issues and peacefully exercising First Amendment rights and doing what I do and praying peacefully with my children, with my family.
Yeah.
But yeah, Dobbs overturns Roe, and all of a sudden we have a weaponized DOJ, and that
Mhm.
comes under the Biden administration.
Mhm.
This all began in 2021, and I was praying with my son outside of Philadelphia Planned Parenthood, and he started to be harassed and bullied and badgered by an escort there, and I just stepped in as a dad, and I said, "You can't do this, leave him alone." The guy wouldn't stop. We had a bit of an altercation, but it was nothing burger in
Yeah.
Philadelphia. The
Yeah.
DA wanted nothing to do with it. We settled. He put me in a private criminal complaint. It was all dismissed. But this was dismissed in April of 2022,
Okay.
and Dobbs leaks early May. So what you have is the DOJ watching cases as they're aware that the case is going to overturn Roe, and they're now individually picking cases that they're going to use to codify Roe and use the FACE Act to persecute pro-life people.
Yep.
And so, of course, Dobbs is overturned in June. Mar-a-Lago happens in the summer of 2022. They start picking up pro-life people. Nothing is happening with my case. I was served a target letter saying I was a target of a federal grand jury investigation 5 days after my case was dismissed at the local level. And basically, they're trying to build a case against me, but they had no case. I had Thomas More Society representing me.
Good.
I
Yeah.
get a call in August of 2022 because all these things are happening. Again, Donald Trump's having issues. But my attorneys are like, have you heard from the assistant U.S. attorney? I said, no. Why would I have heard from her? He said she won't return my phone calls. So what you have is the DOJ ignoring the truth and wanting to make a case. So September 23rd at 6 o'clock in the morning, about 20 plus federal agents, this is 2022 now, storm onto my property while all my children are asleep and my wife. I'm awake. I'm in my kitchen. All of a sudden, a heavy bang at the door. Ring the doorbell over and over again, and someone yells, "Open up." Now that's a recipe for disaster. You don't have
You
announce,
bet.
announce who you are. You don't
Yep.
say the FBI warrant. Just open up. I'm going to get my gun and go to the
That's
door and
right.
protect my home, right?
Yeah.
My children. Well, I don't own a gun. I'd love to own a gun. I just don't want the armory with the 7 little children in the home.
That's right. That's right.
Fully support Second Amendment rights, but I went to the door and I said, "Who is it? Who are you?" Right, to identify. And they banged again, rang the doorbell again, and said, "Open up, it's the FBI." And I said, "Okay, stay calm. I have 7 babies in here." I wasn't even thinking target letter. I was thinking, I don't even know why you're here. But I open up the door, show my hands, and there were 5 federal agents with M16 guns pointed at me, 10 marked and unmarked units on the property, PA state troopers with pistols drawn behind their doors. You have SWAT guys at the back door, 2 of them, got 2 other entrances, no doubt covered, at least 20 plus law enforcement on my property. And I don't know why they're there. And I asked them, and they said, "Well, you know why we're here." I said, "No, you're here because I
Oh,
rescue babies." That's what I said. Next thing I know, the guns are in my house, scanning the whole house. The children are all downrange. My wife comes down, she wakes, and guns are pointed right at her chest. And this is how we started that day on September 23rd.
gosh. And just do a play-by-play. What happens after that
Well, look,
on the legal?
my wife literally takes control of the whole situation. She says, "Do you have a warrant for his arrest?" And they said, "Man, we're taking him with or without a warrant." Now you know it's tyrannical when that's their attitude. They can't do that. That's a violation against the Fourth Amendment. But nonetheless, that's what
But
they
they'll
said.
try to bully their way. Yeah.
Right, we're gonna get what we want. And so
Yep.
they arrested me in front of my children. They didn't let me get any clothes on. I had shorts, t-shirt, but it was freezing cold that early in the morning in fall in Pennsylvania. Nonetheless, I couldn't say goodbye to my kids. I don't know when I'm going back. January 6th, people are still in prison. They take me away,
Yeah.
take me out of the federal building.
Yep.
Now, I'm being charged against the FACE Act, Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, that was installed into law under Clinton in 1993. And basically, I don't know what's going on, but I'm facing 11 years in prison. They tell me, and $350,000 in fines, and so I just assume I'm going to go to federal prison at that point, just remain in prison till the trial or till some sort of sentencing or arraignment. But reality is that's not what happened. I get down to the federal building because we said we'd come in peacefully if they wanted to, indict me, which is what they were doing. They
Saying
ignored
previous
that.
to them showing up, you had
Oh yeah,
communications because of the letter, and it's
yeah.
like, do I need to come surrender myself? You,
Right. We said we'll cooperate. No need to bring an agent out to the house. My attorney said he's a peaceful guy. We'll bring him right to you. Save the money, save the time. He will come right in. But no, they wanted to do it the hard way and they wanted to do it the most reckless way. But when I got down there, they fingerprinted me and mugshotted me. Now, ironically, I'm 100 yards from Independence Hall where the Constitution was signed and Declaration of
that
Independence
is ironic.
rights were
Yeah.
established.
Gosh.
And here they are, fingerprint and mudshot me, and then they bring me to a room, they belly shackle me, ankle shackle me. I'm in their custody, and then they chain me to a table for 6 hours and just sit there. And I've been telling people the last 2 years I've never been closer to Christ in my life. I mean, I just felt
Yep.
that this was an invitation from God, an
Yep.
unjust suffering, persecution. I felt blessed are those that suffer in such ways. And
Yep.
anyhow, we just stayed there. But they released me on my own recognizance, which tells you I wasn't a threat to the community, a flight risk, or a violent offender. And so you ask yourself, why such a heavy raid? Why the show? Well, it's because the process is the punishment. They wanted to humiliate, intimidate, and scare. And I think they wanted to kill me that day. Otherwise, why would you bring such heavy armor with people charged up? It's 6 o'clock in the morning. One of my kids makes a wrong move. My wife drops a pan and they hear a loud noise. Guns are blazing. So it was just a completely reckless. And
Is the
then there we
word.
were. 5 days later, we were arraigned and we were heading to trial, January 24th, 2023.
And play out the whole legal process. Just thumbnail sketch what happens.
Yeah, look, I knew I was going to prison. 98% conviction rate when the federal government comes after you. They don't lose. I have great attorneys. I got Thomas More Society. I got great representation. But we got a DOJ who's got all the money in the world. So we had 4.5 months to trial, a lot of stress, but a lot of peace too. It was a journey of the cross. It traveled, I believe, the stations of the cross. The Lord gave me a couple visions right after I was returned to my family that day. I was
Yeah.
arrested. And he said, "You're going to go to the State of the Union. You're going to carry the way of the cross with me." So I traveled for 4.5 months that Via Dolorosa, which was very powerful in and of itself. But suffice to say, we get to January 6th of all days, which we celebrated a couple days ago. January 6th, the government comes in with a plea deal. Now, this tells you what they thought of their case. No time. I'm facing 11 years. No fine, $350,000 in fines. No probation. 3 years supervised probation. Just plead guilty to the assault charge with the altercation with the gentleman at Planned Parenthood. That's a sweetheart deal, Jeff. You take that deal. My attorneys told me to take that deal.
Any
What
sensible person would, Mark. So
my
what's going
daughter,
on here?
young children. I go home. I said, no, I'm not taking the deal to my attorneys. They said, no, 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 go home.
No, no, come on, buddy.
You're right. So I went home. I said, Ryan Marie, my wife, they came in with a plea. Well, she said, what's that? I said, no time, no fine, no probation. She said, you're not going to take that. I said, I'm not. She said, no, because that's a cowardly
I
deal. She
like
said,
this lady.
and you're not a coward. She's a Spartan woman. She sends her man off in the
And
war.
you
She
said
comes back home with
that's
her
right,
children.
I'm not, honey.
That's right. I said, but I needed that. And then she said,
You
look,
do, you do.
she said, should you want to take this deal? She said, I want you to know something. Don't bother coming home, she says. That's what she tells me. And then she says, thirdly,
God.
we need to do it for the good of the movement. We need to do it for
Yes.
the good of the
Go to the
pro-life.
country.
We need to
Gosh.
lay it all. We need to, even if we go to prison, we got to risk that. We got to risk it because it's the right thing to do, because others are going to be persecuted based on this case law. And so we said no. The DOJ couldn't believe it. So we went to trial, and of course, a jury of my peers, real quickly, in a matter of less than an hour of deliberation after a 5-day trial, acquitted me unanimously.
Of course. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I don't even know where to start, except, something, I've been in the persecution business overseas for 20 some years. And so over time, you kind of learn every trick in the book, what governments do overseas, how governments are weaponized against political opponents. And so one of the things I've said, and I've tried to wake people up to, is that, for years I said, look, the storm of persecution is offshore, but we can see the clouds. The storm is almost here. And I would do whole magazines, whole newsletters focused on that subject over the years. A couple of them just completely helping the people understand Constitution, et cetera, and what's going on with the weaponization. So, but what happens overseas? Overseas they say we have religious freedom. If you ask President Xi of China, we have religious freedom. Now, what does that mean? Now, what that means is if you stay in your apartment, as long as you don't share your Christianity with anybody, as long as you don't share Bibles, share your thoughts, don't assemble, it's all good. We don't have a problem. See, we have freedom. Now, if you do any of those things, and basically the way to think about it is you're going to bring it in the public square. So if you make your faith visible in any way, we are going to chop your head off. So that's the game overseas, and unfortunately, that's what's leaking into the West. The States, we're the best of the bunch. Look at the UK, look at Europe, look at Canada. A whole bunch of horror stories, although it really takes the cake. But that's what's going on. That's where people need to understand that it's that people get in a democracy, they get into positions of power, and then they weaponize the state against their political opponents. That's what's going on. It's the saddest thing because for me, it's the fall of the Roman Empire. This is the beginning of the end of democracy. And it's just so frightening to hear a case like yours because that's obviously all it is, extreme radical leftists that are going after people. And I just want to move this beyond the left and the right. Because what is the Constitution? The Constitution is a set of laws that protect us from each other. We have divergent views. We could believe completely different things. That's natural, but we cannot use the government to go against political enemies. That's the beginning of the end of democracy. I'm off my soapbox. I'm going to throw it back to you. You've thought about this a lot, but yeah, what's your commentary?
Well, you're right. I mean, I think John Adams said he give the republic, and we are a republic with democratic principles.
Yeah.
And that's people are like, oh, we're a democracy. No, we're a
Yep. Yep.
republic first
There. Yep.
with democratic principles.
But
And
what does
so,
that mean, by the way? Stop right there and explain that.
well, look, I mean, you have the people decide their governance, right? We decide our leaders. We decide we are the government essentially. We run the country.
Lex
And then
Rex, if you know
you're
the
turning
Latin
it
phrase.
over to an organization that would just subscribe to the Communist Party or the Socialist Party or whatever, then they're running the country. No, no, not in America. We are a republic. And John Adams said you get 300 years. He'd give it 300 years. We're pretty darn close to 300 years. So before the fall, and I think Rome was like 400 or 500 years or something. But to your point, I
Oh,
see it. I've lived it. I believe it. I mean, we have to take control of our republic, and the Bastille was stormed because that's exactly what the peasants wanted to do and overthrow the monarchy and stuff. So, look, the people need to have a voice, and I think we have made that voice with our voting, and thankfully through the integrity election people, we had a pretty fair, I think, election for the most part.
no.
I think to your point, elections are rigged in these persecuted countries, and people stay in power. Like, how does Putin stay in power as long as he's been in power? Like, the rigged elections. How do these guys, Kim Jong
Control the press, control the
they
judiciary.
control everything. And
Yeah.
and in our country, we used to believe that our press, was being honest with us. And it's only been in the last 10, 15 years, I think people have really woken up to say that they're
Yeah.
not being honest with us.
Can't stand
And
them.
whether
Yeah.
it's the fake news or whatever,
Yeah.
the problem with America is we still believe that people are being honest. The reality is everywhere else in the world knows that their media is biased, and everywhere else in the world knows that their media is working for the people who are in charge. The reality is we still think we have a voice, and we do. But when it comes to our media, it's delivered in a way that is biased and partial. And so, there's a lot of people don't even know what happened to me. And the way it's presented, the way the narrative is spun,
Yep.
it's not even presented in a way that would even look good for me.
Of
As
course.
a pro-life zealot or anti-abortionist,
Yep.
so this is what, this freedom of speech that is enshrined in our Constitution, that fundamental right of, freedom of religion and but speech in particular, is gives you the ability to say and offer in the marketplace of ideas in
Yep.
the public square your feelings on an issue such as life, such as abortion. And so sadly, this is what's being infringed now. And this is and when you silence the church, and when I say church, I mean the whole universal church. When you silence the Christian church, that's the first thing they do. And didn't they try to do that with the COVID pandemic, right? You pretty much destroyed the church and you got control of them.
Strip
And
clubs,
now the
strip clubs
next
could stay open, but the churches had to close.
Right, yeah, exactly. Exactly. So look, that's what Hitler did. He got control of the church, and then he brought himself into power. And it seemed as though that was what was happening. But the will of the people, again, that republic, what was true, actually prevailed in this case. And I think hopefully we'll see some changes in the next 2 years that will help fortify this nation. But we'll see. We'll see how it happens.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I look back at the first Trump administration and Trump was kind of hired he was hired because he's not a politician. He was hired to go in and break Washington. But because he wasn't wise politically, because he's not a politician,
Right.
he went in, and I just tell people, I'm like, think about what he was saying before he went in last time. So, first of all, you have to understand how Washington works, and presidents have said this. They've said, it's like if you think because you're the president, you run the country, you are sadly mistaken. And it's the bureaucrats at the top of state, at the top of the Pentagon, CIA, and those are the people running Washington. So Trump comes in the first administration. He says, first of all, I'm going to put Hillary behind bars. So the Clintons are sitting on top of $1 billion of the foundation, and they have deep, connections all across the U.S. government. And then he says, I'm gonna really rein in the intelligence establishment, and I'm gonna gut the Pentagon. He didn't say it like that,
Sure.
but what do you think happened? It's like, oh gosh. So he just signed up for a world of hurts so it's kind of like if that's your agenda, you don't talk about it. So that's how he did it the first time, and kind of all these things need to happen. The Pentagon needs to get reined in, whether you're pro security or not. The money we're spending, we're broke as a nation. The Justice Department needs to get cleaned up. We need transparency and intel. When people have that much power and money and they can do everything in secret, it's just nuts. So I kind of have hope, but I'm so cynical. I live in Washington, grew up here, so I'm just cynical about the way of Washington and what they're up against and the limitations of the personalities too. But quietly hopeful. So we'll see. But it's really scary. And I'd say again, that we're looking at the slow dismantling of the democracy. And you think back, it's like, what changed? What was the Magna Carta? What did the founders? Why were they so different? What were they influenced by? And it's this phrase, and it's back from those days, and I think it's in the Magna Carta, but it's the Lex Rex. So it used to be the king is law, but the Magna Carta changed everything. And after that, it was the law is king. And the law is what protects us from one another. And we all need that left and right. We have to sign up for that because, as human beings, we are terribly tribal. We fear and attack that which is different. And so if we're allowed to do that, it's mob rule, right? And it's just chaos, and people are decimated. So democracy is a terrible form of government. It's just better than all the rest. Everyone gets their turn. You have your turn for 4 years, and then you turn it over to these other guys that are just terrible and horrible. And then but you trade power back and forth, and the power of the U.S. government is greatly limited, and the power of the legislature, of the presidency, it's all well designed where it's greatly limited. So that was the design by the founders. It just absolutely brilliant, kind of maddening to work under, but brilliant. So when
Right. But
yeah, go
what's
ahead.
important to point out in the midst of what you're saying is God's law becomes before man's law. And so
Amen.
even the
Amen.
Bill of
Amen.
Rights and the Constitution are subservient to
Yes.
that law. And they
Inherent
don't
right.
supersede that. In fact, they fulfill it. That's what they
Yes.
should do.
Yes.
So if we're not getting that and we put Constitution above God,
Yes.
that's where we've gone haywire. We
Yeah.
took prayer out of schools,
Yep.
and that's where things have changed a lot. Removing the Ten Commandments. That whole push to remove the Ten Commandments from the Supreme Court, all that stuff. Like
Yeah.
it's God first, and I think the founding
Yes.
fathers who were Puritans and Anglicans and people of faith, they
Generally.
understood that,
But atheists and theists
and
too.
too that
Yeah.
too, right? So anyhow, I think to your point, right, there's supposed to be that checks and balances that doesn't allow one to infringe upon these ultimate rights that we all enjoy. And I ran for Congress because again, I believe for the last 100 years we've totally shredded the Constitution.
Correct.
Since FDR, we basically
Yep.
just decided we're going to do our own thing. We're going to ignore the Constitution, and we're going to set up all these departments, education, EPA, and all this stuff to run stuff, DOJ, and all this is funded.
Yeah.
Planned Parenthood,
They
it's
can
all
they can
funded.
effectively legislate without
Right.
going through the legislature, right?
That's right. And it's
Yeah.
all a money power and a money grab.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. We need to start as legislators. And if I got in, I would have kind of pushed and still would to get rid of these unconstitutional things. Like it just even Social Security was not that wasn't around then either. So while there's some value to it,
Unless all the money's
unfortunately
being
we've
stolen.
gone off the rails. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, okay, you led into the next thing. So this thing happened to you, and
Right.
then you had this idea. I mean, let's talk about this. Let's go into the next phase of your story where you ran for Congress. How did that come about? What were you trying to do? What did you experience on the campaign trail?
Sure. Well, I didn't want to run for Congress, and frankly, the congressman that represents me, he's a Republican. He's the only FBI agent in Congress. So imagine that narrative. He's the only guy that formerly worked for the DOJ. He didn't support me. I voted for him for 4 terms, but he didn't support me. He didn't help me in any way. He's kind
Was
of
he
a
stepping down?
no. He won
Ah,
re-election. He beat me at the primary,
okay.
and he won re-election. Now he's a shrewd guy. He considers himself a bipartisan guy. But nonetheless, I was not interested in politics. I was just trying to resume my life, get back to my normalcy. People wanted me to share my testimony. And as I traveled around the country sharing what happened to us,
Yeah.
exposing the weaponization, people say, oh,
Yes.
you should run for office. I'm like, no, I
Yeah.
don't run for office. So many people, Jeff, were coming to me asking me. I said, I got to take this to prayer because maybe God's trying to get my attention
That's
here.
right.
So after
That's
about
right.
6, 7 months, I called up Scott Perry, who's a congressman from York County, PA, and a former brigadier general. He invited me to State of the Union. I said, "Hey, I'm thinking about this. What do you think?" And he was giving me some just opinions about life as a congressman. And then he said, "Hey, you got to make a decision. You got to make it fast, but take it to prayer." He said. So I spent a whole month praying, asking my wife to pray. And we really just ask God, if it's your will for us to run, then make that clear and give us clear signs. We
Mm.
got those signs. So we announced in August of 2023 that we were going to run for the first district in Pennsylvania, not having any money, not having a clue
Against a
what we're
four-term
doing,
incumbent.
right, against a 4 term incumbent who is not well liked in the area, although
Okay.
he's got the name. His brother was in Congress before him,
Yep.
so a lot of people liked the name and so forth. But he started to do things that weren't in line with that. Anyhow, you asked me what that experience was like. It's the most toxic thing I've ever done in my life.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Very. I don't think I had a good enough prayer life because it would have probably ruined my marriage and ruined me if I won. So I'm grateful for unanswered
Yeah.
prayers. But I think God used it to, as I talked to you before we recorded this program, really spread the weaponization of the government around the county, which Donald Trump ultimately won. And then that was a county he hadn't won, Bucks County in PA, third largest county in Pennsylvania. He hadn't won, no one had won, no Republican had won that in 40 years. And so I really saw it as God's way of
Mm.
galvanizing the message so that he could win Pennsylvania. And I think if he doesn't win Bucks County, and the Amish for sure came out huge, I don't think he wins Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
kind of how we reconciled it. I have no desire to go back into politics.
I don't
But I learned a
know.
lot from it.
I don't know. The Lord, just because you lost the first time, I see. You're just the kind of guy we need because you're not interested in the money and the power, right? There's no particular payoff. It's like what a pain in the rear, but it's service and it's so greatly needed. So we'll just see. I'll be praying because I want to see what the Lord does because we
Yeah.
just desperately need. We need a new legislature. We need new hearts and new blood. We need to be rejuvenated. But I love what you said because look, in the end, politics. If you're a conservative, there are lots of people out there that think politics is the answer. And I say politics is hugely important. It's super important. We can't ignore it. And Christians have ignored it in the past. And guess what we got? We got what we got right now. And we got what a toxic soup we're in. So if you want to live in complete chaos and mess, then principled people and moral people and godly people should stay out of the government. But if we want to turn things around, Christians have to get involved. Um, so I kind of lost my train of thought, but what are those lessons? And this is what should Christians do? We all know there's a problem, and I've got my own ideas, which I frequently stand on a soapbox and shout about. But what do you say
Yeah,
politically?
it's a great question, and the first thing I say is be not afraid. I mean, we get that echoed in the scriptures
Yes,
over again, and
yes,
we have to remind ourselves, like, just because a guy like me became a target, and I consider myself kind of like a normal guy. I mean,
yeah,
I'm an activist, but I'm just a caring citizen in my community,
yeah,
trying to help people, run a
yeah,
ministry.
yeah,
I'm trying to live a quiet life. I'm not trying to, make waves. But some people saw my story and they stopped getting involved. And so the first thing people did was they detached. They were afraid and they stopped being a voice. So that the first thing they got to do, and the lesson I learned is encourage people to not be afraid, right? And to also see that when they come after you, that can be a blessing too. In other words, for me, it's been one of the most profound journeys of my life, and
yeah.
I know my children are better for it. We all have PTSD from the raid, and that's not good.
Literally, right? Yeah,
But there is grace there, and grace is
yes,
sufficient amidst all of it. So the first
yes,
lesson is don't be afraid of that persecution, because that can be what can make you a saint, make you a holy person.
yeah,
And I think we all want that. We all want to live a
yes,
holy life.
yeah,
And so don't be afraid of that. And I think God uses that to help his people get closer to him. And I know I drew tremendously close to the Lord in my persecution, and I draw on that. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is, like you've been saying, is, like, if perhaps for such a time as this,
that's right.
you have been called, right out of the book of
Yes,
Esther, right? So you're going to complain about your government, you're going to complain about all this. Well, don't complain if you're not going to do anything. The system's set up for you to do something. It's set up for you to have a voice, even though it's being, kind of trampled upon. It's
yeah,
still set up for you
yep,
to have a voice and to make your opinions and feelings known and to get engaged in the process. So
yep,
I would say don't be afraid, be willing and open to stretch yourself. Maybe if you feel like you're not the right candidate, that's probably what makes you the right candidate, right?
right. But
Those that want to
yes,
be a politician shouldn't be in politics.
that's right.
Those that don't want it, that's where they get it. There's a sacred duty in the midst of it. So I would say, look to that, perhaps for such a time as this, that this generation of Christians is responsible for this generation of souls. And so, what is our role in all that? That really needs to be taken to prayer.
Yeah,
And if we have strong feelings on this, well, gosh, share that. Start an organization like you did, start an organization and start helping people. And I think our lives will become a beautiful tapestry of just yes to God and yes to his holy will in our lives when we start seeing these evils of our day and we respond with godliness to it, and holiness.
mm,
And I think that'll create the platform for you to move forward. And I think you just move prayerfully through that. You don't have to be president to make a difference.
that's right.
I touch souls all around the world through my just allowing myself to be persecuted. I had a guy reach out to me in the heartland, middle America, and he said, I'm a lousy Catholic, but seeing what's happening to you is bringing me back to church. And I
That's
thought, geez,
great.
I do it for that guy, just
That's
that
right.
soul. So we have to not look at it through the macro, but I was touching souls in Africa, touching
Yeah,
souls in Europe.
yeah,
I mean, that was all because I allowed myself to be victimized, right? And allow
right.
myself to suffer, like a lamb to the slaughter. And I think sometimes that's counterintuitive. We want to like lash out, and we have to, and when we can in certain ways. But sometimes allowing yourself to receive the
Yep,
punishment and letting others see that is your best witness. And I think somehow God uses that in a mighty powerful way, like Daniel,
yep,
Jeremiah, John the Baptist, all of it. You're seeing these guys, these prophets of today, like yourself, and people who are willing to proclaim the injustice, and you to the glory be God.
amen. Yeah, and I didn't finish my thought. I drifted off, but I was going to say I just love your hierarchy because look, politics is so important. I kind of droned on and on. Politics is very important. We have to be involved. But what we desperately need is revival. That's where we've gotten off. So on the one hand, we can say it has prayer in schools, but it's really, that's the political side of it. But our hearts have drifted, and so many are lost and they're not following God. And the Lord's heart is He's always at work to revive, to bring the dead to life, to resurrect, to revive, to heal. He's always doing that. And so we need to cry out for our fellow man all around you. Look at the levels of anxiety and depression and the fear of death and their fear of what's going on geopolitically. People are desperately afraid. And they are the dead and dying. And for those of us who have the message of life, we've got to open our mouths and stop being afraid to say we have a mission from God. Politics is here, God is up here, and the politics can't fix it, can not in the long term. So we get the blessing as we turn to God, as a nation turns away or turns towards. That's where great blessing comes from, and so much would be fixed. And it's so crazy because the dead and dying are all around us, and they're, even if they're hostile, people are desperate for a way out, for a message of hope, for to know, how do I get out of this existential mess I'm in? Is there any answer? So I just, you kind of touched on that, and there's a whole bunch in there, but we desperately need revival. And I think we all need to first sign up for that, to say, God, I am yours, and I'm yours completely, wholeheartedly. So again, like you, it's like,
Yeah.
if I'm
Well,
to
look,
run for office, I'll do it.
there's a lot of thoughts that coming to mind as you shared those great insights there. One is Richard Wurmbrand, who was over in Germany, tortured for Christ. He's there watching this all play out, and he's a Lutheran pastor, and his wife is. They have this congregation of pastors coming together, and they're talking about
Mhm.
faith, and they're ignoring the obvious. And she says, "Are you going to get up and say something?" And she says, "Do you realize?"
Yes.
If I get up and say something, you won't have a husband anymore. And
Yeah. World of hurt's
he
gonna come
said,
down.
she said to him, I don't need a coward for a husband. And then also, you think of just like how it played out, Bonhoeffer and all these guys.
Yes.
You have to see that in the midst of great evil, and that's what you're talking about.
Yes.
We're talking about depravity at the highest level, whether it's abortion, sex trafficking, the persecution of Christians.
Yeah.
You have an evil that is
Real darkness.
so great that it's our silence in the presence of evil
Yes.
that will convict us on our judgment. In other words, like
Mm.
you can
Mm.
no longer be silent if you're aware. Like, in the churches in Germany and
Yes.
Poland, they'd say, sing louder. We don't want to hear the train cars going by with
Yes.
the people, the Jews crying out. And we want to ignore it. We don't want to think about it. You can't do
Yeah.
and so this is very important that we start to take stock of that accountability of our role in the midst of it, right? What's our role? And it could be a small role. Like you're yes to going to trial. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to go out and go overseas and take a sentence for
Right.
somebody and you take their place. All you have to
Right.
do is say yes to your own little prison that you're in
Yeah.
and be willing to accept that suffering for God's glory. And so, to your point, I think we got to build in those small in those small ways, and then it magnifies ripple effect in like the ocean, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that's the hierarchy. So we dealt with that. And the only thing I'd say, let's come down to the political, because it's like people need to be
Yeah.
engaged. If we are not, what we've got, the soup out there is, we bear responsibility of it. And starting in the Scopes trial, the Christians said,
Mhm.
Politics is dirty. We don't want it." And so, so who filled in the void? But most people are not going to run for office. Some crazy people like you said, "Oh gosh, I'll do it." And then you learn what it costs, right? But praise God. But most people won't, right? And so, but even then, it's like, go run for dog catcher if you can't handle, Congress. Show up to the school board
Sure.
meetings, run for school board. Again, that's running. Most people won't do it, but then show up to the meetings and be vocal and push back and stand up for righteousness. But above all, again, the spiritual is, I'm going to submit my life I'm going to give everything I have to him. I will anything he wants. That's what I'm going to do. That's my life. And that's the people he's looking for. He's searching high and low. He's looking for that heart out there. So that's the only thing I'd say to the people who are listening to us, that you know this will ring in your heart. So that's the place to start. That's the new life. And who knows what comes from that, but that's who the Lord's looking for and who he'll use. So
Amen.
I'm going to give you the microphone for the last words.
Oh, well, it's been a pleasure and it's been a great interview with you to talk about kind of the evolution of all this and what it means for us today. And so it's a great opportunity, a great privilege for me to share what happened. And again, I just encourage those that are listening, if they say, well, a lot of people say, well, I don't have that gift that you have. And I'm like, my gift is just showing up, right? And I think that's most of the battle, is just showing up. So my encouragement, my final word would be, just show up, let God show you what he wants you
Mm.
to say. Yes to going to that meeting, say yes to, listening to something you don't want to listen to, maybe reading a book that you don't want
Uh,
to read, but just show up to that moment, whatever it
uh,
is. And then let God, again, and then this is a powerful thing that Mother Teresa once shared. She said, give God the permission to use you
yes.
without him needing your permission. In other
Yes.
words, God, I give you permission to use me without asking me for permission to do so.
Yeah.
And I think if we do that, great things are going to happen.
Amen. It's like he is the king, he is the God of loaves and fishes, and we are that. We are
Amen.
nothing but we have a few loaves and fishes. That's no obstacle to him. I love that quote. Love it, love it, love it. So, Mark, God bless you. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your heart to serve your country and your willingness to go through a lot of pain to try to make a difference. And again, I'm not sure the future's set, even though you've had a full taste of politics. I'll be praying, and I hope you run again. So, but praise God. Thank you for your heart, and thank you for the time today.
Thanks, Jeff. God
All right,
bless.
God bless.